There we go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to our regular bi weekly bird identification thing. My name is Nate Swick. I am the ABA's digital communications manager, and I am joined, as always, as usual, not always, but usual, by my colleague and friend, Greg Neise, who is our web developer here at the American Birding Association. Greg, I don't know what it's like up in Chicago, but it is spring like all of a sudden here down in the southeast. It's 70 degrees. There's pollen all over the place. My allergies are getting hammered, but there are birds singing like near constantly outside. It's spring. We're here. It's what we've been waiting for. It's here
It
finally.
is. And it's I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to talk a little bit about it because spring is 2 to 3 weeks early, and I'm a little worried
Yeah,
about that. I'm a little worried about that. I saw that in DC, for example, all the cherry trees are blooming,
yeah, I
and
recall that
it even
happening.
made national news that it was earlier than normal. And here in Chicago, the crab apples and things like that have started to bloom,
Yeah, the
and
Bradford pears.
the Bradford pears exactly. And what uh, typically when we get a warm spring like this early, what happens is the trees all bloom out before the warblers and orioles and tanagers and things get here, and then the birds just keep moving until they find flowering trees in abundance,
Mm-hmm.
which for us means northern Wisconsin or Minnesota when that
Yeah,
happens. And last year was the exact opposite. We had such a
I remember
cold,
that.
rainy, horrible weather, but the birding was off the hook.
Yeah,
The
that seems to be the
flowers,
case.
the trees hung on to their flowers for weeks. The birds were all feeding on the ground because the insects were numbed and on the ground, and the rain kept knocking them out of the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people who started birding last year had one of the most amazing spring migrations they're likely to have for a decade
Yeah,
or more. And now I
yeah.
feel
I,
bad.
I,
I feel bad for
I
them because now this year may not live up to that at all.
Yeah, well, that's sort of normal for us down here in the southeast. We usually are completely leafed out by the time that the real long distance neotropic migrants start coming by the end of April, early part of May. But I do recall sometimes in Missouri that maybe this is a Midwest thing because the weather tends to swing a little bit more there than it does maybe in the southeast.
Yeah.
But where they've had situations where they get like a really late frost after the trees have started leafing out, and so like the tree leaves at the tops of the trees like get knocked off, but the leaves kind of insulated a little bit more down on the bottom still are
Yeah.
mostly leafed out, so then everything has to stay low and they get like this really, it sounds like that's the sort of what you're talking about. Whether or not it's, I don't know,
Well,
every
well,
spring is
no,
different, so
it
we'll
is. It
we'll
is.
see.
And when you do this for a long time, that becomes something interesting in its own realm. But
Hmm.
last year was really just as far as birding is concerned in the Western Great Lakes, everywhere from all along the Great Lakes and into Iowa and so on. It was so cold and wet that the birds were foraging. Birds like cerulean warbler and
Hmm.
things like that, which are real treetop species, were down
Yeah.
on the ground. People had more orioles and tanagers and grosbeaks at their feeder than like I can remember ever seeing. I mean, I remember
Hmm.
seeing pictures in this group of people with like 10, 12 orioles at their feeders, which is insane.
Yeah.
And they're not likely to get that this year.
Yeah, every spring is a little bit different, and you just kind of have to take what you get. Anytime that the birds slow down a little bit is always good for us because sometimes it feels like in the southeast that spring migration actually lasts like a day and a half. And if you happen to be busy on that day and a half, then you're sorry, you're out of luck. You got to wait
Yeah.
until next year, which is why I
Yeah.
like fall better anyway.
Yeah, and I just see that our colleague Jenny uh, brought up that Bradford pears smell like fish, and there is one in the
They're
parkway in
awful.
our neighbor's front
Yeah,
yard,
there's one
and
of them next door.
I can attest, yes, they smell terrible. The only thing that
Yeah,
smells
my
worse is as Alanthus, tree of heaven.
Oh, yeah. When I was in college, we had ginkgo trees that were lined up next to the dormitory where I lived, and every time they dropped fruit, they'd get squished on the sidewalks, and for about 3 weeks, it would smell like warmed over death. It's awful.
There is where I live in Berwyn, and for people in the Chicago area, you might know this, but there is a stretch of Harlem Avenue south as you're approaching, like south of Cermak, I think it is, that they lined the entire parkway with ginkgo trees, and it looks spectacular.
Oh, they're beautiful. They just smell awful.
But when they drop fruit, it's like you can't walk down that side of the street. It's just covered.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think we've vamped a little bit here long enough. We've built a nice little audience here. Thank you all for joining us. If you guys have any questions about birds or birding, I'll back up a little bit. What we usually do here is that we will grab a few images from the ABA's What's This Bird Facebook group, which is kind of a crowdsourced bird identification group. Frequently, we have some interesting pictures that get posted to that group. People want identifications. Sometimes they're very seasonal dependent. Sometimes they're just interesting to Greg and I, and we will tackle them here. And Greg has put some together. We're going to talk about them a little bit. But if you guys have any questions out there about birds, birding, bird ID, our opinions about just about anything, you can leave them. We're broadcasting this on Twitter, on Facebook, in the What's This Bird group, and on YouTube. So I am trying to keep an eye on the comment sections in all three of those places. So if we have any questions, we'll grab them. We'll talk about them.
I'm watching
for
Facebook
about an hour here.
I'm watching Facebook if you want to keep the eye on the other two, which I can't do from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, we're doing a new thing on Twitter, so we'll see how that works. I don't know how easy it is for people to submit their comments like it was before, but we'll do the best we can. Should we do it?
You want to just jump right into the pictures?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So this one comes from Florida. And maybe I can't hear you. Hang on just a second, Nate.
No, I haven't talked yet. I haven't said anything.
Okay. Now I can hear you. There we go.
Yeah.
So this one comes from Florida, and this is a bird that is moving in numbers. Now, these are two pictures that were in the same post. And this is a bird that is moving in numbers right now. And we get this bird, pictures like this in What's This Bird a lot, because these birds are very visible, and they're quite common.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is clearly a very large soaring bird. I mean, it's a still photo, but I think anyone who is familiar with this species, you look at this photo and you can pretty much imagine it kind of twirling around in the sky with not even a single flap. Things that stand out to me are those very long, broad wings, the little tiny head. You don't really see much of a head at all on this bird. And the sort of long tail. And this is a bird I see out in my backyard.
And lots of fingers in those wings.
Lots of fingers. Yeah, fingery. This is a bird I see out in my backyard quite often. In fact, I could probably look out back there out my window and see one. They circle around over the forest pretty regularly.
Yeah, it's interesting. They've been moving into urban areas a lot. And so I live in a very urban area in the Chicago metro area. And we have them nesting, and I see these are turkey. This is a turkey vulture.
Yeah. It's a hard nest to find. They're pretty secretive when they're nesting. Yeah.
But let's take a look at what you might confuse turkey vulture with.
Yeah, a lot of big dark soaring birds this time of year as raptors are starting to move back north, and you've got a nice selection of vulture-y birds here, Greg.
Yeah. So. Here we have the turkey vulture from the poster's original picture in the center, and starting top left, we have now this bird. Remember, was in Florida, so there's another common vulture in Florida, and that's black vulture, which is the banding code BLVI at top left, and you'll notice right there, you'll see these birds often soaring together in kettles or flocks. And you'll notice the shape is really different. They both have a lot of fingers, but the wing of the black vulture is shorter and wider and stockier. The tail is so short as to be almost non-existent.
Yeah, in the wings, I mean, those are the big things you're going to look for. The black vulture has much broader wings, kind of shorter, broader wings. They tend to flap more because
Yep.
they don't glide as much. So if you see them kind of like a flappy vulture pretty far away, chances are it's going to be a black vulture. Jim Fiermeyer notes in the YouTube comments that he says that turkey vultures have white sleeves and black vultures have white gloves. That's a good way to think about it, because the turkey
That is a good
vulture,
way to think about
the
it.
flight feathers on that wing, and you can see in this image, even though it's not super clear, the kind of silvery black gray flight feathers on that turkey vulture, whereas the black vulture has kind of white silvery patches towards the tips, only on the tips. And that's something that you actually see when the light hits it pretty well. You can see pretty well when the light hits it, I should say.
When they circle around, and that's another thing about turkey vulture, is they have a very unique style of flying, which you can kind of pick up in this image. They fly with their wings in a dihedral, which means a V.
Shallow V. Yeah.
A shallow V. And they rock and tilt like this as they soar. And they're one of the very few birds that does that. And what's interesting, and Stephen Williams points out in the comments in Facebook, that zone-tailed hawk, which is in the desert Southwest and the Rio Grande Valley, mimics turkey vultures, and they mimic the flight style, and they have the same long wings, and they often soar with turkey vultures, which birds that the hawk might want to hunt. Those animals will ignore turkey vultures, and
turkey vultures eat dead things.
That's right. The sly zone-tailed hawk will slide right in with them and use them for camouflage. So moving over now to the top right, we have red-shouldered hawk, and this is kind of a long-winged buteo that it's and I picked a picture that where it's kind of got its wings in a similar thing, but again, look at the different shape overall. Look at the really big hand of the turkey vulture and those really long. It's almost like the bird's body is too small for the wing panel. I mean,
yeah, that's the turkey vulture you're talking about. Yeah, yes. That is there's actually a term for that. It's called wing loading, and birds that glide a lot tend to have smaller bodies and larger wings when they have that. That's called wing loading. Birds like another good example of that is a magnificent frigate bird. A bird that's like all wing and soars rather similarly to turkey vulture, actually, except over the ocean.
Oh, and Chris Ortega points out that I got the banding code wrong.
There.
Yeah, it's a typo. My finger slipped over.
You and I are right next to each other on the typo.
Yeah. That happens. And then down to the bottom left, red-tailed hawk.
Before we move on to red-shouldered, I will say that because I see a lot of red-shouldered hawks in my neighborhood. That's probably the classic suburban hawk across much of its range in the eastern part of the continent and in California as well. So I can clearly see that this red-shouldered hawk, this is empowered flight. When they glide, they tend to spread their wings out a little bit, and they show a little bit more fingers. Though not as much as the turkey vulture, obviously. And red-shouldered hawks, especially this time of year, like they are loud as all get out. Like they will not shut up. So you will hear them frequently, whereas turkey vultures almost never make a noise. I've never heard a turkey vulture actually, and I've been birding for forever.
No, I've never even heard one when I'm holding one.
Yeah,
they don't make noise. But one other thing to point out about red-shouldered hawk. Is that when they soar, the wing shape is different, and I like to, and I should have put one in here. I didn't have time to grab another photo, but the red-shouldered hawk, I think of it as reaching forward as it soars. The wingtips look like it's reaching forward, and it's got the fingered wingtips that look like it's sort of scooping forward a little bit, which is different. Go ahead.
Yeah, which sorry, I think there's a little bit of a lag. We keep stepping on each other, but that's fine. Kate Carr also noticed it's usually pretty easy to spot the white crescents on red-shouldered hawks as well. And a bird that's soaring, the sun is going to be behind it. You're going to see those transparent parts of the wing a little bit more than you might in this image.
Yeah, well, and sometimes sometimes even when you think you can, you can't, and It's a good field mark, but it's not a hundo.
Yeah.
So moving down to bottom left, red-tailed hawk. And, red-tailed hawk has the classic Buteo shape. It's got those broad wings and a short, broad tail. And again, we're comparing this to Turkey Vulture, and we can look at the others here as well. But again, in comparing this with Turkey Vulture, look at how different the wing shape is and the body size compared to just the overall structure of the bird is very, very different. And
so red-tailed has those kind of bulgy secondaries, the inner part of the flight feathers on the wing, and a smaller hand, whereas the Turkey Vulture, as Greg pointed out at the beginning, that big hand with the long fingers.
And to the right there, we have bald eagle. And bald eagles, as far as plumage, can look almost like anything. They can be almost jet dark to mottled like this bird. But again, we're looking at the shape here. And two things you notice with the bald eagle compared to the Turkey Vulture or any of the others is that the wing panel looks like a 2x6 or a 2x12.
Yeah,
it's
board. Flying
this
board.
Big flat board. And they really, unless again they're in powered flight, if they really just always look like that from almost any angle. It's got a bit of a longer tail than the Buteo, the red-tailed hawk, to the left. But look at the size of that bill. Look at the size of that big honking bill on that bird.
Big bill.
Big head, big bird. Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the eagle that is most frequently, I should say, mistaken for Turkey Vulture is golden eagle, which tends to have a little tiny head compared to bald eagle. Those two, people see one of those dark bald eagles, one of those young dark bald eagles. They sometimes want to say golden eagle, but you're more likely to mistake a Turkey Vulture for a golden eagle than a bald eagle.
Yeah, and that does happen in Colorado. I remember last year. Ted Floyd on this program. I had Ted Floyd joining me, and I was pointing out, Turkey Vulture and bald eagle, and he's like, not in Colorado. Colorado, it's golden eagle.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on here to the next one, and this is another bird where we're going to talk about shape.
This is wild. Yeah.
I like this one. I like this one a lot, and this one is from Ohio. And so, I mean, looking at this bird, and these are two pictures of the same. These are the two pictures as they were supplied to us in the What's This Bird group. Just look at how big and bulky and
so
massive this bird is. And in the larger picture, we can see, if you look closely, we can see the definition of the bill. So we can see the gape, and we can see the top of the bill with that highlight. Bill. It's got a big honking wide, big bill. But just the bulk of this bird. There's very few birds that we have that have this kind of bulk.
Relatively small head.
And relatively small head. Yeah. And so going back to what we were saying earlier about just the giant wing panel of bald eagle. Well, this is what it looks like when the bird is sitting and those giant wings are folded in. But let's compare that with some other birds sitting in silhouette. And so this is a red-tailed hawk now sitting next to that same bald eagle. And when
I like how you've posted these here together, but like in reality, these two birds would not necessarily be that close in size. Like a bald eagle is a huge bird, but you can see the proportions are quite different when you've got these birds kind of sized together.
Yes,
Size
and
similarly,
that
I should say,
and that's we're looking at shape and structure here, and so when you're viewing a bird silhouetted like these are by itself, you really can't tell. Size is very hard to discern accurately.
Right.
So that's why I put these birds together at the same relative size, because we're looking at shape here, but look at how much slimmer the red-tailed hawk is. And we think of red-tailed hawk as a bulky bird.
It's a big hawk. Yeah,
it is, and it's a big hefty bird, but not compared to a bald eagle.
Yeah, and the wings too. I mean, we talked about how that bald eagle has those huge wings. I mean, the wing tips and the tail are about the same length on this bald eagle that's sitting here, whereas the tail's a little bit longer for this red-tailed hawk, which depending on how the red-tailed hawk is sitting, sometimes they can kind of drip their wings a little bit, so their wing tips are about as long as their tail. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how massive those wings are on that bald eagle. Like that is a lot of bird.
And just to throw another one in here that's really common that people post a lot, and just to show another example of how shape and size and gestalt. That's a Cooper's hawk now that I have added, and just look at how slim and long-tailed the Cooper's hawk is compared to the red tail on the opposite side of the eagle. And
if you'd sized that Cooper's hawk so that its body was roughly the same size as that bald eagle, its tail would be drooping all the way out the bottom of the
I mean,
it's a long tail. It's a lanky bird.
yeah, that's true. But the people again, they see Cooper's hawks and like, oh my God, it's so huge, especially when it's silhouetted against the sky. But it's really a slim bird compared to the Buteos and of course the eagles. So let's see what we got here. The discussion in Facebook. Everybody's basically just agreeing. No questions yet, really.
Thank goodness.
Mia McPherson, a Cooper's hawk as large as this one appears like it could take on a wild turkey. Yeah, it probably could.
I wouldn't put it past a goshawk, actually.
I wouldn't put anything past a goshawk. Hell, let's talk northern pygmy owl.
Right.
All right, I'm gonna move on here, and this is a fun one because it's one of my favorite birds, and this is a woodpecker. We can tell it's a woodpecker by how it's clinging to the side of the tree, and there's not a whole lot of birds that do that. Brown
Long
creeper and
upright.
nuthatches, so we're pretty aware it's a woodpecker, and it's a very strongly patterned black and white woodpecker.
Indeed.
And so what do you see in here, Nate?
So whenever I see a woodpecker like this, obviously the pattern, the kind of the barring on the face, the mask, the malar stripe, the white underparts, it leads me to two of our North American woodpeckers, Harry and Downey, which a lot of especially novice birders, heck, even experienced birders sometimes get turned around on these two birds. But when I'm thinking about Harry and Downey, is like if I look at a bird and I think, boy, is this a hairy woodpecker or is this a downy woodpecker? It's almost always a downy woodpecker. Like when I see a hairy woodpecker, like this one here, with that big, strong bill and kind of a longer tail, kind of a more classic woodpecker body shape, it's always pretty obviously a hairy. You look at the downy right there, exactly as you put. You've nicely sized them so that the bodies are the same size, which is not usually the case in the field. But you can see the downy has a dinky little bill. Its head looks larger in proportion to its body. It has a shorter tail in proportion to its body. It's a very uniquely shaped woodpecker. It's like a plush toy version of a woodpecker, whereas a hairy woodpecker is very much in line of body proportions of like red-headed, red-bellied, your sapsuckers, those kind of birds. That's kind of the way it looks. Whereas downies are very cute. Yeah,
and when you think about birds like hairy and downy woodpecker, it helps. If you're familiar with their habits and how they feed and their habitat. Downy Woodpecker, as Nate was just describing, is a smaller bird with a smaller bill, and it's more compact. And that's because it tends to feed in the outer branches of trees, and even kind of specializes a little bit on the thick stalks of certain forbs. So it'll. I've even seen them like drilling in goldenrod stems in the fall, and plants
Sweet
like that,
balls, things like that.
Yeah, and you'll often find them at the edges of prairies, down in the prairie plants, knocking insects out of the dead plants in the fall or the winter.
They are right alongside like the chickadees and the titmice and the nuthatches, kind of doing that stuff on the edges of the tree. Whereas Harry, it's going to be right on the trunk. It's going to be doing woodpecker stuff.
It is a woodpecker of mature forests and big trees, and you'll notice a few subtleties here. Notice the nasal tuft, so the white patch of feathers at the base of the bill and the hairy, or the downy, and how much bigger and more noticeable it is than the hairy.
It adds that sort of very cute impression of the bird.
Exactly. Also notice that we can see the dark banding on the outer tail feathers of the downy. And it's typical. Sometimes it doesn't pan out, but usually if it's got black bars on the outer tail feathers, it's a downy. If it doesn't, it's a hairy. In the Pacific Northwest, you can throw that out the window.
Throw a lot of things out the window up there.
Yeah, the hairy woodpecker. The hairy woodpecker in this picture is from Colorado, and it's darker than many people are used to in the East. It doesn't have
much darker
as much
than the ones we see. Not as much
white
white on
markings.
The
exactly.
Stephen Greenfield notes in the YouTube comments, they're one of a dozen or so pairs of woodpecker species around the world with virtually identical plumage, but they are unrelated. Like they are not related to each other, completely different genera. Like it's which is wild. Why that happened, I don't necessarily I don't know. But they look.
But it is wild.
We think of them as difficult species pairs, but they're not closely related to each other at all.
Yeah, and just to finish up the field marks we can see on these two, you'll also notice the difference in the weight of the head markings. So the downy shows more white. The hairy is there's more black. It's closer to 50-50, whereas the downy is kind of like 65% or more white.
A lot more white.
And you'll also notice this little spur on the shoulder of the hairy that kind of goes over the shoulder and into the upper breast, which the downy usually doesn't show. So all those things put together, but really, it's as Nate was so wonderfully describing a moment ago. The gestalt of the bird, the shape and the compactness, the small bill, how it looks cute. If you're wondering, it's gonna be a downy. When you see a hairy, you're gonna know it.
It's a hairy.
Yeah. But then,
funny enough, I almost always see hairy woodpeckers with pileated woodpeckers. Like they hang out together, big brother, little brother type thing going on. I often see them together in the woods behind my house.
But here's a bird showing up in a lot of people's backyards right now. And
it's good that you did this. Steve Greenfield in the YouTube says, not Steve Greenfield, sorry, Jim Furmeyer says, sometimes folks will confuse a hairy with this bird you're going to talk about here, Greg.
Yeah, so this is another woodpecker, and it's a common woodpecker, at least in the East. In the West, there are some different species. And this is a female, maybe a young bird, and they all in this plumage tend to look pretty similar. So these field marks kind of hold true across the ABA area in very general terms. But what we have on the right here is a yellow-bellied sapsucker.
On the left.
And I'm sorry, on the left. My screen's mirrored.
Maybe you're on the other side of the bird. Yeah. Sapsucker.
It's a sapsucker, and it's remarkably similar, even though
I mean, it goes to show. I was saying that hairy woodpecker has a much more classic woodpecker proportions, much classic woodpecker look and feel, vibes, if you will. Yeah, you can see that. Like the length of the bill is similar, the proportion of the head to the body is similar, the length of the tail is similar. I tend to see hairy woodpecker and sapsuckers doing similar things, like on similar sized trees.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. It can be a confusion species, more so than Downey sometimes.
Yeah, and it's got this big, bold, like white stripe.
Yeah, the big skunk stripe.
Yeah, I mean the difference is that on the hairy it's on the back, and on the sapsucker it's on the wing panel.
On the wing.
And the sapsucker has a very complicated patterned back and rump, and the undersides too, but not so much. I mean, if this was an adult male, there'd be no question because there's so much red and so much else going on. But in this plumage, it can be confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Sapsuckers
are noisy woodpeckers too.
Yeah, they are. And what's interesting about sapsuckers is that they tend to be shy. A hairy woodpecker, they're pretty bold birds. Sapsuckers, they tend to kind of want to like stay on the other side of the tree. They're kind of quiet and kind of demure and just kind of sit there quietly. But when they decide to make noise, oh my God, they are the noisiest woodpeckers.
They're so loud.
And there's a small
child
portion.
is crying in the woods, and you go find it. Yellow-bellied sapsucker.
There's a small area of northern Illinois where they breed, and in fact, in this little tiny pocket in the summer, they're the most commonly found woodpecker in this little tiny pocket of Illinois. But in the springtime, when they are screaming at each other and drumming, and the drumming is really really unique. It's kind of bump bump bum bum bum. It's got
real erratic. Yeah.
It's got this like kind of 3-part to it that's unlike all the other woodpeckers. Yeah, they are really noisy and just really neat birds. There's so much about sapsuckers, their habits and their lifestyle and their life history. That's just so neat. In the fall, when they're in early winter, when they're drilling their sap holes. So for those of you who don't know, the way they make their living is they drill tap these little holes in the outer bark of trees in straight lines and rows, and they'll do a set of these and then move to another tree or another part and do some more. And then they come back and they run them like a trap line and suck the sap that's dripping, but then also eat the insects that get stuck in it. But all kinds of other birds, from hummingbirds to warblers to you name it, will come and take advantage of these sap wells when the sapsuckers are
especially
working.
here in the southeast. The sapsucker sap wells are good places to look for rarer overwintering warblers like black-throated blue warbler or things like the prairie warbler or whatever. If they overwinter, Cape May warbler, they frequent sapsucker wells. Like that's where they get their food. That's how they survive the winter.
And you'll find it's interesting. The warblers I've seen several times. Warblers will be. One thing that jumps out in my memory is of a Cape May warbler defending its sapsucker wells. And I mean, it's scaring off everything, including trying to scare off the sapsucker that was drilling them. Len Kopka says they can mew like a cat. Yeah, a cat that's being strangled.
They're so weird.
Run over by a
weird
tractor.
Sounds.
They're very.
Rovanellian on the YouTube says one lives in her backyard. Will fight the red-bellied that lives there all day long. The backyard sounds like angry, squeaky toys. Pecker wars. They don't really like each other, woodpeckers.
Yeah,
I've seen flickers fighting with redheadeds over acorn caches. I've seen
anything.
They don't like each other at all.
So come on, you guys, let's get some questions in here. And anything you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, if you have any, please let us know on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We are monitoring.
We're
running
through these birds quickly because normally you guys throw more comments at us during the talking part here. So if there's anything you want to talk about, let us know in the comments. And we will be doing our best to address it or answer it.
Yeah. Happy to talk about birds for as long as you want us to.
As
Well,
long
maybe
as
not
it's
that long.
as long as it's like within the next 25 minutes or so.
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably more accurate.
Ben Lisdis points out that the D in Downey reminds me that it has a diminutive bill. Good to see Ben here. Hi, Ben.
And the H in Harry means it has a huge bill.
Oh, look at you go.
Just throwing that out there. Just came to me. Just came to me.
Just boom, man. You're quick.
Yeah.
So we got a couple of things coming in here. I'm going to do these backwards a little bit. Cynthia asks, are woodpeckers stashers? And some of them are. Yeah. Some of them are, not all of them.
Acorn Woodpecker in the western North America is sort of famous for making like these massive granaries of acorns in old and dying trees. Here in the eastern and middle part of the continent, red-headed woodpeckers will do that as well, though not nearly to the extent that the acorn woodpeckers do.
So did you?
And then other birds will use them. Like I said, I've seen flickers robbing red-headed woodpecker granaries before, so they know they're there.
So speaking of acorn woodpecker, this is a western species that is famous for building these really complicated granaries where they store acorns. They drill little holes in the outer surface of the tree trunk or in the tree, and they stuff the acorns in there, and they make them just right so they embed them in there, and it looks like the tree has this weird acne or something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the birds themselves are
acorny.
Acorny.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Any more time for that one?
And they're and the birds themselves are communal, and they're noisy and just fun. I mean, they're just neat birds. But did you see that YouTube video where the acorn woodpeckers filled up a one of those big covered radio antennas? So I forget what those antennas are called. They're big dishes, but they have covers on them. And they're on tall towers everywhere. So the acorn woodpeckers found a hole at the top, and they just started dropping acorns into this thing. And there's this video of a technician pulling the cover off, and there must be 500 pounds of acorns that come
years
rolling
and years of collected acorns
that come rolling out of this thing. It's amazing. Chris Ortega asks, any advice on finding a grasshopper sparrow?
Yeah, so that is a bird that is very habitat specific. So knowing its habitat, knowing its vocalization, you will go a long way. So they like kind of tall grassy fields like hay fields and stuff, pastures that cattle will use. But as long as there's not a lot of tree growth in it, they're very much a grassy bird. And then you have to go out there and you have to listen for the song, which is, if you're not really paying attention to it, is very easy to miss.
It is.
I think a lot of people easily miss it. It's very high. It's very thin. It sounds like a bug rather than a bird. And so you go out there, you park yourself next to one of these big grassy fields, you listen for this song. And then once you hear that song out there, you take your binoculars and you scan the field until you see what looks like a big clump of grass or seed pod or whatever sitting on top of one of those grasses, and look at that closely, and chances are you'll have yourself a grasshopper sparrow. They're more or less the same color of the grass they like to hang out in. They're very easy to miss. But that's how I look for them.
Yeah, and in proper habitat, and out here, I mean, I live in the land of grasshopper and prairie sparrows, and some of the things that I've noticed over the years is that grasshoppers are a bit more aggressive in their choice of a singing perch than the other sparrows that they inhabit the prairies with. So Henslow sparrow, for instance, you will almost never see on a barbed wire, on any kind of a fence wire or up on a transmission line or anything like that. But grasshopper sparrow, frequently you'll see them on fences and on wires overhead and structures like that. And Savannah sparrow will often get on the fences, but not on the wires. Mm-hmm. And as you're driving up to them, Savannah sparrow will just, before you can get your glasses on it, it's gone. And grasshopper sparrow is like, nah, this is mine. I'm not moving. You gotta.
They're pretty confident in their.
You gotta get out of the car before I'm gonna move.
And that's how I look for them. Like, you drive around and you'll pass a field and be like, that looks good for grasshopper sparrow, and you get kind of a sixth sense of it, and
But as Nathan said, the best way is to learn their song, because that's the way you find most of them. Yeah. So Brenda Chase asks about northern and Louisiana water thrushes, and in our last episode 2 weeks ago, Nate and I spent a good portion of it talking about those two species and going into detail. So if you go to our YouTube channel and pull up 2 weeks ago, the last episode of this show, we in the middle there we talk about Louisiana and northern water thrushes with some comps, and so there you go. Check that out, Brenda.
And Nightingale on the YouTube, hi Ann, notes that she's been teaching the D versus H, Downey versus hairy, diminutive versus huge thing for years. So maybe I didn't come up with it, or maybe I heard it somewhere in the back of my head and it stuck. I'm switching D to dinky.
There you go.
I can avoid the copyright, and
and H to humongous.
Humongous. That's right.
There we go. But again, when you see them by themselves, it can be hard to tell. And Robert Crawford asked about habitat differences between Downey and hairy. Well, Robert, if you had been listening a little while ago, we actually talked about that. But just in a quick nutshell, Downey tends to feed on the smaller branches, and hairy feeds on the trunks, or inhabits the trunks.
Like a real woodpecker.
Exactly.
Downey is really more like a woodpecker chickadee hybrid in its affectations.
Oh. So we got one more picture here, so maybe we'll take a look at that, and then hopefully
we can come back and get some questions here. Yep.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite spring birds, because it's one of the first that shows up for us.
Had mine a couple days ago. Had my first
of the insect eating, warblerish migrant things that show up. This bird is one of the very first. And every year it confuses people, because it can be confusing. So what do we got here?
So this is a sort of plain looking bird, all over sort of blue. I'm gonna lead it on a little bit, but it's kind of a light sky blue, grayish color with black wings, black tail, with white on the outer tail feathers. But just something this small, this lanky, this diminutive. Typically I can hear it. I can hear it calling its little buzz, buzz, buzz call. This is blue-gray Nat Catcher, one of our first migrants. In fact, a bird that will overwinter in some parts of the southeast, particularly towards the coast. But it's a very early migrant to much of the eastern part of the continent, and in the west. It's all over. It's continent one, if I recall. But blue-gray Nat Catcher, great little bird. This is looks like a female. The males, this time of year at least, have that really nice black eyeline that makes them look put off all the time.
Yes.
But this is a wide-eyed female with the white eye ring and all that.
Yep. And in the this time of year, for many of us in the eastern, well, as you said, they're found pretty much across the ABA area, but they're much more migratory in the east. This is one of the first migrants you'll see, and it because of that, it throws people off, and you're like, okay, the warblers are here. Which one is this? And it's not a warbler at all, and it's kind of hidden back there with the kinglets and the wrens and all of those little things. But it flits around in the mid-level branches and acts like a warbler. and it's kind of showy, and it throws its tail back and forth, and it makes a lot of noise. And it kind of demands your attention.
Lynn Kopka in Facebook calls it a miniature mockingbird. Yep, that's a good way to think about it. It's very similar in dimensions, in proportion, if not in size, and attitude, if I may say. Both
Absolutely.
these birds are kind of in your face.
Mike Grant says he just posted 4 photos of a dark red-tailed hawk to the group. Wondering what version it is. Well, if it's dark, it's a Western version.
2.0.
And yeah, that would be 2 or 2.1. It's one of the
system it is.
It's one of the Western variations. And actually, if you get the large Sibley book, let's see, I do have it right here. Let's see what he says real quickly. We'll pull up red-tailed hawk, because I'm terrible at remembering. You know what? He doesn't give the Latin names of.
No, Sibley definitely does not do Latin names.
Yeah. But if
just dark, light, southwest.
I don't know if you can see here, but the darker ones like that are the Western subspecies.
Yeah, us in the East, birders in the East, we are lacking when it comes to cool variations of red-tailed hawk. I'm always amazed at how many different looks they can give you when I get to bird the Great Plains and West.
So Stephen Williams says a northern mockingbird was very vocal all day and night last summer. Does that mean he didn't get a girlfriend?
Probably means he got several.
It probably means he's got several, and he's telling everybody else to stay away from his harem.
Yeah. They're loud, even when they're paired up. Like they're gonna make a lot of noise. There's not much you can do about that. That's mockingbirds for you.
Yeah, Mia chimes in with the subspecies name of that hawk, and thank you, Mia.
Yeah, Calurus. Yeah, if you have any questions, please let us know in the comments here on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, I guess. Now that Twitter's gotten rid of Periscope and they've gone to their native media producer thing, I guess it's much harder to do comments. So we'll try and figure that out. I apologize if someone is in there trying to ask us questions and we are ignoring it. It's new. Twitter's thing is new now. So we're still working on that.
A couple of things to mention to all of you while we've got your attention.
Absolutely.
Nate hosts our most excellent American birding podcast, and this one in particular, which dropped yesterday, is really, really cool. They're all cool, but this one's especially cool. And it's Scott Widensall talking about bird migration and talking about his new book. And some of the things that get discussed are really kind of mind-blowing, like swifts that stay airborne for 10 months at a time, or birds that migrate tens of thousands of miles. It's getting lost in the
virtual thing.
There it is.
World on the Wing is Scott Widensall's new book. It's really great. It just came out. Scott Widensall on migration is someone that you want to read or listen to. He is great. And definitely check that out. It's American Birding Podcast, aba.org/podcast. You can find all of them.
Yeah, and if you go to aba.org, it's big and front and center on the homepage there.
Indeed.
Another thing on aba.org, if you scroll down that page a little bit, you'll notice that we have a new version of Birding News. And if you don't use listservs, if you have no idea what that is, check it out. It allows you to read messages from birders all over the ABA area and all over the world, and it can be fascinating to see what other people are seeing and what they're talking about, and much easier to navigate than, say, Facebook groups or some of the other ways that birders keep in touch.
Indeed, and as someone that likes to search for unusual birds found across the continent, Greg's new Birding News update makes that really easy. Basically, It's search. You just search. It's the dream that we've been hoping for ever since listservs came. You can search across all the listservs and find what rare birds are being seen. We've got a bunch of questions on YouTube, and I'm going to just start throwing them out right after. So I'm going to get to you guys, but Greg, go.
Just before you move on from that, I just want to give a big shout out to Matt Smith of Fantasy Birding, who did the under the hood work on the new version of Birding News. Did a fantastic job on that.
With Cornell now, they gotta steal. Yeah. So we're gonna roll right through it. You folks on YouTube, thank you for bearing with us. Jim Fiermeyer says he's never birded out west. How would one ever distinguish a female blue-gray gnatcatcher from a female black-tailed gnatcatcher? I have a couple notes because this is not something I've had to do that often. I live in the southeast, so we have a lot of blue-gray gnatcatchers and not a lot of black-tailed gnatcatchers. But in my relatively limited experience, black-tailed gnatcatcher tends to be kind of a darker blue, and maybe it's more kind of a subtle thing. It's more gray than blue, whereas blue-gray gnatcatchers are kind of that sky blue-gray thing going on to it. And also, if you can get a look at the underside of the tail, that tail pattern is going to be the important thing. Black-tailed gnatcatcher is called black-tailed gnatcatcher for a reason. The under part of the tail, if you can get a look at the underside of it, there's a lot of black in there. Whereas blue-gray gnatcatcher is mostly white, so those white outer tail feathers show. You can see on the right photo here, you can see the underside of that Alabama bird. Blue-gray gnatcatcher underside of the tail, almost all white, and those are the outer tail feathers folded underneath the central tail feathers. Whereas black-tailed gnatcatcher, as its name implies, has a lot more black. And although I have seen a photo. I did see a photo once of a blue-gray gnatcatcher that had a wet tail, and so those white outer tail feathers were wet and they were sticking together, and all you could see are the black middle tail feathers. So it looked like it was a black-tailed gnatcatcher, but it was actually a blue-gray gnatcatcher with a wet tail. But most of the time, that's not something you need to worry about. If you can get a look at the underside of that tail, that's going to be how you identify those birds, which, as Jim says, very similar.
Yeah, and Stephen Williams on Facebook chimes in that California versus blue-gray is difficult, and it is. I mean, these birds are not easy. One other thing is that going from light to dark, and again, this is general. There's variation all across, but blue-gray gnatcatcher tends to be the lightest underneath, and black-tailed is a little darker, and California is the darkest underneath.
Yep. Timothy Condon asks, he is going to Galveston in 3 weeks. What should he be looking for? Galveston, Texas in 3 weeks. I would say watch the weather, because the upper Texas coast in 3 weeks could potentially be really hot. And you want the weather that's going to call those birds. It's going to be both. It's going to be hot in temperature, and it's going to be hot because the birds are going to be streaming in there in huge numbers. Galveston, Texas, High Island, Boy Scout Woods, all those kind of classic spring birding locations. When the weather is right, they can be just swamped with migratory birds. And fingers crossed for you, Tim, that you get those. So,
and what you want to be watching for in the weather is a southerly push from the Gulf, which will give the
those birds off of you out of Yucatan.
A tailwind, but then a storm system coming in from the north or the west that intersects along the coast. And when you get rain, when the birds coming across the Gulf hit rain, they just drop right out of the sky.
They have to find the first piece of land they have. Yeah, and typically that's Galveston, Texas. A lot of times
it's Galveston, Texas, or High Island near Houston. And if there isn't that weather, a good number of them just keep going and spread out, and you don't get these incredible concentrations. But when you get the right weather this time of year, like in a couple of weeks, boy, it can be just amazing.
The possibilities are extremely good, but even a relatively mild flight can be really enjoyable in a place like that.
And there's also just excellent shore birding around Galveston.
Yeah, and that'll be good regardless of the weather.
I got my life for bar-tailed godwit in Galveston.
There you go. And Rovanellian says, this is my first spring migration in Central Florida. I know Florida can be weird when we get all sorts of birds at different times of the year, rest of the country. But any tips spring migration in Florida. Yeah, things are looking good right now. I mean, this is about the beginning of spring migration in Florida. The birds, from especially the ones that winter in the Caribbean, are going to kind of hit the panhandle and kind of work their way up. But just get out as much as you can and
Learn
and
your
look around. I
songs.
mean, there's going to be constant movement for the next 6 weeks or so.
And the
across much
warblers
of the
in
continent.
particular are going to be very vocal. And
Mm-hmm.
get Larkwire, our favorite way to
There
learn
you go.
bird songs. Get Larkwire. That's larkwire.com. Get that on your phone, and it's a really fun little game to help you learn bird songs, and it's wonderful. And it's our personal favorite here for that.
Yep.
So Robert Crawford asks, how
Just
reliable
gonna
is
point. That's a great
voice
question.
to distinguish fish and American crows, relevant as fish crow extends range north? Well, voice is the only slam dunk way of doing it.
And even it can be kind of tough sometimes because
Especially
especially
in
young
summer.
American crows can make a lot of weird kind of quacky fish crow like sounds. But this time of year, you can be pretty confident that the fish crows are making fish crow sounds and the American crows are making American crow sounds. In the summer, things get more difficult. But
And if you get really
yeah.
familiar with fish crow, you can tell young American crows apart because it's not as consistent. Fish crow tends
Yeah.
to be. It's
Yeah.
it's really
Pretty
consistent
consistent.
and repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
They almost sound like frogs.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I've had fish crows. So I live in North Carolina in the Western Piedmont. The fish crows mostly vacate in the winter towards the coast. And though we do have a few that hang around at some places, usually landfills and places where, marinas and stuff where they can find fish guts and whatnot. But yeah, they've started coming back in the last couple of weeks. I've had fish crows calling over my house and yeah, they're making their fish crow sounds, and the American crows are making all the other sounds.
And as he said, they are expanding their range. They're coming up the Mississippi. They're now
Yeah.
found regularly in central Illinois around Springfield, and there have been reports this week in Champaign. Last year, I had one in Cook County in Chicago. So that was only the second county record. And they're definitely, and especially this time of year, they're moving around.
Yeah, Robert Crawford says, thanks. Fish crows are regularly reported in Ontario.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, along the lakeshore, I'm sure. They do.
And
They call them fish crows for a reason. They do tend to stay towards habitats that are wetter, lake shores, ocean fronts, marshy stuff, more than American crows. They are sort of wedded to that sort of habitat more than the American crows are.
And there's also a small population, breeding population in southwest Michigan.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Paula Edgar asks if they hit Florida Panhandle, did they spread towards Gulf Shores, Alabama too? I assume you're talking about migratory birds. Yes, and in fact, Gulf Shores, Alabama, we're getting to another one of those. We talked about Galveston and High Island and the birding hotspot. Once you get over towards Gulf Shores, Alabama, you're getting to another one of those sorts of places where, depending on the weather, you can get huge influxes of migratory birds that are crossing the Gulf from the Yucatan. Places like Dauphin Island is sort of one of the classic birding hotspots in that part of the country. But yeah, the same thing's sort of happening. Once you get towards the middle of the Gulf, you're sort of getting the combination of those what are called trans-Gulf migrants and the circum-Gulf migrants that kind of meet each other, and so you get a little bit of both.
Yep.
Whereas you usually get one or the other in other places.
Well, that's bringing us right up on an hour here. It's been it's been really
got a little busy
fun.
there at the end.
Yeah, that's good. Good. Keep us busy.
Jim Fiermeyer notes, think fish crows sound like Fozzie Bear trying to imitate an American crow.
That's
waka,
good.
Waka waka. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So
Muppets fan in me feels that.
we are really we really love doing these. We love hearing from all of you guys. And if you like what we do at the ABA, you like this show, you like the podcast, and you like the other things we do, right up here, aba.org/join. Become a member, become a stakeholder, and help us produce the things we do. Most of what we do for the birding community, we provide for free, like this. And it takes a little bit to keep the lights on and keep us going. And for $30 a year, so about the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can really make a difference and help us keep these things going and support the birding community.
Absolutely. We do offer a lot of free resources here in the ABA, and we have a lot of resources for members only. Things like our publications and discounts to our partners like Cornell Birds of the World and Beauty Books and things of that nature. There's a lot of good things that come along with membership, and we certainly appreciate if you join us.
Yes, and as Nate pointed out, there are member benefits, and we are constantly adding things to the member benefits in terms of, as he said, discounts from some of our retail and travel partners, online content like Birding Magazine and North American Birds, and more to come. So, and $30 will get you all of that digitally.
Sue Ann Pyle asks, "How do I check if I have joined?" Do you have any?
Actually, the best way is get on our website under the contact and call the 800 number. Yeah.
Yep. Kelly will help you out, or
Yep.
Leanne. So we'll say goodbye to y'all. Thanks for joining us all over the internet. We'll be back in a couple weeks to talk again, hopefully a little further along in migration. We'll get some questions about Tennessee warblers and orange-crowned warblers and things of that nature.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bird on, my friend.